This is actually a wonderful treat for me. I have always been interested in QA type things. I do my day job. By the way, this is where you can get the slides. You can go ahead and follow along at home if you want to. I'm going to talk about the testing pyramid, the individual levels, individual tests, and how the tests talk to each other, more or less, and an extension of the testing pyramid. Next slide. Well, you get the idea. Next slide. Okay. Hardware. I'm a software guy. Okay, so this is me. If you replace, instead of zombies, robots, and aliens, it's dev, DevOps, and QA. This is basically me in the center. Instead of death to humans, it's John Mitchell. I think that dev is really the only important part of dev is really how do you know you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing. You have to have a test. You have to have a higher level representation of your development code so that you actually understand that you're doing the right thing and that you don't break it in the future. As a context, today we're going to be talking about testing levels. Who has not heard about the testing pyramid? Okay, cool, cool. I've talked to some developers who have not done the testing pyramid. I'm like, have you ever had a job ever? But you know, it happens. The testing pyramid is a useful tool to, it's a series of mnemonics that basically helps you as a developer and as a QA person, how do you have certain numbers of certain levels of testing. There's a bunch of other things which are very useful, which we won't talk about tonight. Feedback loops are incredibly important in terms of what do you do over time to get feedback on whether your stuff is working or not. And agile testing quadrants, which is more about what sorts of quality do you have for your business level people and what do you have for the technical level people. The traditional thing, you always have a cat when you have the testing pyramid. That's just the way it is. If you have a budget for designer, which I don't, this is what you do. Traditional testing pyramid gives you a number of different bits of information. So you have UI tests on the top, service level tests in the middle, and then unit level tests at the bottom. The unit tests are for your developers. They're written by developers. They're in your native level code. If you have 3 different languages, then you have 3 different sets of unit tests in the bottom level. And you have a lot of them, as the pyramid shows. Unit level tests are awesome because they're fast. UI level tests are slow and cranky and they tend to break a lot, so they tend to be expensive. But so this is a traditional unit testing pyramid, and this gives us some information. If you don't have a designer budget, then this is what it looks like. So this is sort of useful. Okay, I should have some UI tests, I should have a lot of unit tests, but really, what do you do with this? And the answer is you could look at it at different layers. The UI level, you probably should just have a few things. The tools that you use only work on like 1 or 2 or 3 different levels. You can have a tool like Robot Framework that runs at the UI level and also the API level. And that's kind of nice because you can master one tool and then you can handle multiple levels. Wait a second, you guys are all QA people. What do you guys use for this? What do you use for UI testing? Selenium, okay, what else? Google, what? Protractor. Cypress. Okay, what do you use for API level tests or service level tests? Rest assured. Okay. Well, Postman. Screen rest. Java screen rest and play. Okay, I haven't heard of that one. That's cool. I don't know exactly why it is, but it seems like most of the things only work on one level. If you're doing things like Python, you can do PyTest. You can actually run all your unit level tests in PyTest, but then you can do PyTest BDD for doing behavior-driven development. You actually run the same lower-level code, but run it at the API level also. I actually don't recommend this because once you have any sort of, I don't know what level of QA people you are, but if you have a test and you have any code in it whatsoever, you're now shutting out a big part of your audience. At my current place, our QA guy doesn't do programming very well, which means that if you have programmers write programming tests, they're going to put JavaScript in there, and the QA guy is going to get lost, which means that you're now shutting out part of your audience. So I would suggest if you're doing your greenfield projects, you should do the unit level tests first, because you're always going to have code, and then do a couple UI level tests. Right now we're using Ghost Inspector, which I'm a fan of, but you guys can do stuff. And then if you need to, do API level tests. So I would suggest you're always going to have these 3 different levels. This is actually sort of controversial, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes. Another thing that the traditional unit, the testing pyramid talks about is individual tests. How do the tests affect each other? So here are 2 different level tests. One is an API level test. So it says, okay, we're going to call this large function. On the lower level, you just have like 20 lines of code or something like that. But in practice, an API level test is going to call one or multiple lower level functions. A big limitation that people don't necessarily recognize is the visibility that you're doing from the tests at each level are very different. At the bottom level, you have the code, you do a function call with a specific set of parameters, you get a specific set of parameters back, you can test every single little bit. And the middle level, and the API level, you're calling like functions that call databases, and do all sorts of stuff. Or especially when you get into the UI level, your one UI level test is going to call a bunch of APIs and like dozens and dozens of lower level functions. But you can't test all the outputs because at each level, you're getting the power of, you don't have to specify every single little thing. But as a QA person, you can't test every little thing. You don't have the visibility anymore. And what this means is, from a QA level perspective, is you should have a whole lot of unit level tests and test every single request, every single response, every single field. Because at the higher level, you're not going to have the visibility. Imagine you're doing a login form, and at one point in time, your login form just says, okay, this user has this user ID, you stick it in a cookie. And that works, that's perfectly fine, and your test will work. But then later you change it saying, oh, we really probably should save the users into a database. Which means now your user level, your UI test, you're creating a user and creating a cookie, and you're not necessarily going to see it. In the second case, you're creating a user, it's going to hit the database, so you're not necessarily going to be able to see it. Which means that you need to have tests at multiple levels. Unfortunately, that's pretty awkward to do. You need a tool like Robot Framework. Another way to look at the testing framework, the testing pyramid, is extension. The testing pyramid deals with UI, API, and unit level things. These are basically automated, more or less dev-focused tests. But you can think of these as different conceptual levels. You can think of these levels, each level is aimed at a different person. The unit tests are basically for your devs. The API tests are probably for devs, maybe for QA people. The UI tests, they're probably for QA people, devs, but also your business. If your business cares about like a password length and how many funky characters and so forth, then you can put that information in your UI level tests, and then you could have, hopefully, your management is able to look and see exactly what that means. And from a dev perspective, it doesn't make any difference because who cares about passwords? But I do security things, and when we answer call for proposals, they actually ask us, for your application, what are the rules for passwords? Is there a certain length and a bunch of other things? From a dev perspective, you don't care, but from a UI perspective, you do care. So basically, these are basically more or less automated. You can think of it as an extension. At the UI level, you're dealing with HTML, and you click here, you get this result, click here, get this result. Conceptually, you could say, oh, let's say one submit button is green and one submit button is blue. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever, which means your users are going to be confused. You could look at the higher level saying, I want my users to feel enlightened by using the software. You can't really automate this. These are different higher levels of generality. And you can think of the traditional testing pyramid as like the middle part. You can extend it above. You can also take the traditional testing pyramid where the unit tests support the API tests, and the API tests support the UI level tests. You can also say that resources support everything else. So if you're a DevOps person like me, you probably want resource level tests. Databases, you want to make sure your network is set up correctly. Because if you get these things wrong, like your certificates are wrong, bad things happen. And the entire stack of dev level tests is going to get very confused. So this is all traditional. Well, it's traditional plus my extensions for testing pyramid. There's another model. This guy has a good idea. Write tests, not too many, mostly integration. Who's seen this? Nobody? Okay, fair enough. This is the testing trophy, which I think is cool because it looks completely and totally ridiculous. But the point, the general guide for the return on investment for the different forms of testing. And what this point is, basically, you know, code is easy. You probably shouldn't have that many static level tests. Who cares, really? You should have mostly your tests at integration level tests. If you're doing something like your code runs on physical hardware, your integration level test is basically the entire thing you have. So your integration tests are the most important part. The end-to-end tests, the browser level tests, according to this model, don't matter that much. How many people have seen this? Testing trophy? Okay, a few people? Okay. What do you guys think about this? Is this a good idea? Should you do like a lot of integration tests and just few statics, few units? I'm actually kind of half and half on it. I think that the idea of doing your tests based on the return on investment is spectacular. It's really easy to have tests that are basically meaningless. I've seen tests on code that are not used in production. These things give you negative return on investment. If you have integration level tests, or if you care about your return on investment, that means you're actually doing stuff that the business cares about. So I've been talking about testing levels, the traditional testing pyramid. There's other things to talk about, but that'll be for another day. There's some awesome resources. So thank you very much.